In the verdant mountains of Thessaly, where rocky peaks rise majestically against the azure sky, echoed a melody of festive preparations. The kingdom of the Lapiths stirred with great anticipation, for the most awaited day of the year approached. The matrimony between Pirithous, the valorous sovereign of the Lapiths, and the enchanting Hippodamia, a princess whose beauty was sung by bards throughout all Greek lands. The preceding months had been dedicated to preparations for this sacred union. Skilled artisans worked day and night, carving ornaments in marble and noble wood. Weavers embroidered tapestries with golden threads, while gardeners cultivated the most beautiful flowers to adorn the royal palace. The celebration promised to be grandiose, worthy of a king who governed with wisdom and justice. Pirithous, known for his generosity and sense of honor, decided that this feast should gather not only the nobles of his court, but also all those who maintained kinship or friendship bonds with his people. Among the special guests were the Centaurs, extraordinary creatures who inhabited the nearby forests. These beings, endowed with human torso and equine body, descended from ancient lineages and were considered distant relatives of the Lapiths. The decision to invite the Centaurs was not taken lightly. Pirithous understood their impetuous nature and primitive instincts, but firmly believed that family bonds and mutual respect would prevail over any savage impulse. Messengers were sent to the mountains, carrying invitations ornately crafted on fine parchment, sealed with the royal coat of arms. When the expected day arrived, the palace transformed into a scene of incomparable splendor. Flower garlands hung from marble columns, perfumed torches illuminated the corridors, and long tables were arranged in the great hall, covered with the finest delicacies. The aroma of roasted meats, fresh breads, and ripe fruits lingered in the air, mingling with the fragrance of roses and jasmine. Among the first to arrive was Theseus, the legendary hero of Athens and intimate friend of Pirithous. His presence brought not only honor to the celebration, but also security, for his heroic deeds were known throughout all Hellas. Theseus observed the preparations with admiration, praising the magnificence of the feast and wishing happiness to the couple. At dusk, when the first stars began to dot the firmament, the rhythmic sound of hooves beating on the courtyard stones was heard. The Centaurs had arrived. Led by the imposing Eurytus, they advanced in formation, their majestic figures standing out against the twilight sky. Their eyes gleamed with curiosity and their deep voices echoed cordial greetings. The matrimonial ceremony proceeded with solemnity and beauty. Under the protection of the Olympian gods, Pirithous and Hippodamia exchanged vows of eternal love, while rose petals were tossed into the air by the guests. The chorus intoned sacred hymns, and libations were offered to the immortals, requesting prosperity and harmony for the new union. With the rituals concluded, the banquet began. The tables groaned under the weight of refined delicacies. Whole roasted wild boars, fresh fish seasoned with aromatic herbs, aged cheeses, golden honey, and succulent fruits. However, it was wine that soon became the protagonist of the night. Clay amphoras contained the precious ruby liquid, produced in the region's finest vineyards. The Centaurs, accustomed to the wild life of the mountains, rarely had access to wines of such quality. Initially, they drank with moderation, savoring the divine liquid and participating in conversations with growing enthusiasm. Their laughter became more resonant, their gestures more expansive, and gradually, prudence began to fade. Eurytus, the leader of the Centaurs, consumed wine with particular voraciousness. With each emptied cup, his eyes became more clouded and his behavior more erratic. The alcohol awakened in him instincts he habitually kept under control, and his attention began to fix disturbingly on the radiant figure of Hippodamia. The bride, dressed in white silk tunics and adorned with precious jewels, circulated among the guests with grace and courtesy, receiving congratulations and blessings. Her natural beauty, enhanced by the happiness of the moment, emanated a light that seemed to enchant all present. It was this vision that awakened in Eurytus an uncontrollable and dangerous desire. Without any warning or ceremony, the centaur rose abruptly from his place and advanced toward the main table, where Hippodamia conversed with other ladies of the court. His heavy steps echoed through the hall, and gradually, the murmur of conversations gave way to a tense and expectant silence. With a brusque movement, Eurytus extended his powerful arms and seized Hippodamia by the wrists, pulling her against him. The princess, taken by surprise and terror, cried for help, trying to free herself from the centaur's iron grip. Her desperate pleas echoed through the hall, transforming the festive atmosphere into a nightmare of horror and incredulity. The reaction was instantaneous and explosive. Pirithous leapt from his throne with his face transfigured by fury, his hands trembling with indignation. His voice thundered through the hall, demanding that Eurytus immediately release his wife. The centaur, with a cruel smile distorting his lips, responded with defiance and arrogance, declaring that such exceptional beauty should not belong to a single man. Theseus, always vigilant and ready for action, did not hesitate for even an instant. Grabbing a spear that decorated one of the walls, he launched himself against Eurytus with the speed of lightning. Other Lapith warriors followed his example, wielding swords and spears, while the centaurs, perceiving the escalation of conflict, regrouped to face the threat. What had begun as a celebration of love rapidly transformed into a bloody battlefield. Tables were overturned, golden plates scattered across the floor, and the metallic sound of weapons mixed with war cries and laments of pain. The centaurs, taking advantage of their brute strength and superior size, charged against the Lapiths with savage fury, while these responded with strategy, courage, and superior skill in weapon handling. In the center of the tumult, Theseus faced Eurytus in single combat. The Athenian hero moved his sword with incomparable mastery, delivering precise blows that the centaur could avoid only thanks to his natural agility. Eurytus, in his uncontrolled fury, lifted a heavy wooden bench and hurled it at Theseus, who dodged it by mere seconds. With a war cry that echoed throughout the palace, Theseus advanced again, this time finding his target. His blade penetrated deeply into Eurytus's flank, drawing from him a roar of pain and surprise. Taking advantage of the opening created, the hero delivered a second blow, more accurate and fatal, that pierced the centaur's heart. Eurytus collapsed heavily, and his fall resonated like an ominous thunder amid the chaos of battle. Meanwhile, in another part of the hall, an equally impressive spectacle unfolded. Caeneus, a Lapith warrior of legendary reputation, faced multiple adversaries alone. Blessed by the gods with the gift of invulnerability, he fought without shield or armor, trusting only in his spear and sword, which gleamed under the flickering flames of the torches. The centaurs surrounded him, attacking simultaneously with improvised weapons and diverse projectiles, but their blows seemed to cause no harm to the divine warrior. Caeneus advanced implacably, felling enemies one after another, his presence on the battlefield infusing renewed courage in the hearts of the Lapiths and growing terror among the centaurs. The violence was not limited to the great hall. The battle spread through the perfumed gardens, ornate courtyards, and palace corridors, transforming every corner of the royal residence into a combat scene. The sound of clashing weapons mixed with the furious neighing of centaurs and the command shouts of Lapith warriors. In an elevated area of the garden, a group of centaurs led by the cunning Nessus attempted to reorganize their forces and plan a counterattack. Armed with bows and quivers filled with arrows, they positioned themselves strategically to attack the Lapiths fighting in the main courtyard. Their intention was clear: to use their advantage in range to reverse the course of battle. However, their plans were frustrated by the unexpected intervention of Atalanta, the famous huntress whose skills with the bow were legendary throughout Greece. Invited to the celebration due to her fame and friendship with other heroes present, she observed the battle from a privileged position on the hills adjacent to the palace. With deadly precision and incomparable speed, Atalanta began to shoot her arrows against the ambushed centaurs. Each projectile found its target with lethal efficacy, felling enemies one by one before they could comprehend the origin of the attack. Nessus, perceiving too late the threat hanging over them, tried to locate the source of the shots, but an arrow pierced his throat before he could react adequately. Atalanta's decisive intervention allowed the Lapiths to recover the initiative in battle. The centaurs, now deprived of their tactical advantage and suffering significant casualties, began to retreat and fight with growing desperation. Their brute force, which initially seemed an overwhelming advantage, proved insufficient against the coordination, strategy, and superior determination of their adversaries. Throughout the conflict, Pirithous maintained constant concern for Hippodamia's safety. Making his way through the tumult of battle, he finally located her sheltered in a small chapel within the palace, protected by loyal maidens and dedicated guards. The relief in his eyes upon seeing her safe was profound and touching, and for some precious instants, the spouses embraced, finding mutual comfort amid the storm of violence surrounding them. Renewed by the certainty of his beloved's safety, Pirithous returned to combat with redoubled vigor. Joining Theseus and Caeneus, he formed a formidable alliance that led the final assault against the remaining Centaurs. The three heroes advanced like an unstoppable force, their weapons gleaming under the torchlight, inspiring the other Lapiths to follow their example. Perceiving that defeat was inevitable and their losses were becoming unsustainable, the surviving Centaurs began to retreat. Some fled toward the dense forests they knew intimately, others perished fighting until their last breath, preferring an honorable death to the humiliation of flight. The battle that had begun with sunset finally came to an end when the first golden rays of dawn tinged the horizon. The palace, which just hours before had shone with joy and celebration, now presented a spectacle of devastation. Precious furniture lay destroyed, embroidered carpets were stained with blood, and the aroma of flowers had been replaced by the acrid odor of battle. The silence that followed the end of combat was heavy and melancholic, interrupted only by the moans of the wounded and the lament of women. In the subsequent days, Pirithous assumed responsibility for leading his people through this unexpected tragedy. Solemn ceremonies were performed to honor the Lapiths who had lost their lives defending the sanctity of matrimony in the honor of their kingdom. Purification rituals were conducted by priests to cleanse the land of spilled blood and appease any divine wrath that might have been awakened. Marble monuments were erected in memory of the fallen heroes, and their stories were preserved in epic hymns that would be sung by future generations. The courage demonstrated by Theseus, the miraculous invulnerability of Caeneus, and the lethal precision of Atalanta became legends that transcended the borders of Thessaly, spreading throughout all Hellas. The surviving Centaurs retreated to the most remote and inaccessible mountains, where they lived in isolation and bitterness. Some, repentant of their actions and horrified by the consequences of their uncontrolled impulses, sought a more harmonious existence with nature, dedicating themselves to contemplation and the study of healing arts. Others, consumed by resentment and thirst for revenge, transformed into shadowy creatures that terrorized solitary travelers on mountain roads. This war, which became known in history as the Centauromachy, transcended its character as a local conflict to become a powerful symbol of the eternal struggle between civilization and barbarism, between reason and primitive instinct. Philosophers and poets of later epochs found in it a rich metaphor to explore profound themes about human nature and the dangers of lack of self-control. The fate of the protagonists of this tragedy also became matter of legend. Caeneus, the invulnerable warrior, mysteriously disappeared after the battle. Some versions tell that the gods took him to Olympus as reward for his bravery, others narrate that he transformed into a majestic eagle that eternally soars over the skies of Thessaly, watching over the peace of his native lands. Atalanta returned to her adventures throughout the world, but her decisive participation in the Centauromachy added another glorious chapter to her already impressive list of heroic deeds. Young huntresses throughout Greece began to invoke her as patroness, inspiring themselves in her courage and incomparable skill. Pirithous and Hippodamia, united more deeply by the adversities faced, governed with exemplary wisdom for the following years. Their kingdom knew an era of unprecedented prosperity and peace, as if the gods wished to compensate for the suffering of that terrible night. The union that had been stained by violence transformed into a symbol of love triumphant over adversity. The lessons extracted from the Centauromachy became fundamental to Lapith culture. The importance of moderation in all things, the value of self-control, and the need for constant vigilance against forces that can destroy social harmony were incorporated into teachings transmitted from fathers to sons, from masters to disciples. Generations of narrators perpetuated this story, each adding details and interpretations that enriched the original narrative. Sculptors immortalized battle scenes in temple friezes, painters decorated vases with images of heroes in combat, and dramatists adapted the tragedy for stages, ensuring that its message reached all strata of society. The Centauromachy remains to this day as one of the most striking episodes of Greek mythology, offering timeless reflections on the dangers of excess, the importance of responsible hospitality, and the value of courage in the face of adversity. It is a story that reminds us that even in the most joyful celebrations, we must remain vigilant, for the forces of disorder can emerge unexpectedly, testing our determination and our most sacred values.